Mrs. King has requested that we have the tape of his last sermon played to us now.
We all think about it, and every now and then I think about my own death, and I think about my own funeral, and I don't think of it in a morbid sense. And every now and then I ask myself, what is it that I was going to say? And I leave the word to you this morning. If any of you around, when I have to meet my day, I don't know the long queue. And if you get somebody to deliver the eulogy, tell them not to talk too much. Every now and then I wonder what I want them to say. Tell them not to mention that I have a Nobel Peace Prize. That isn't important. Tell them not to mention that I have 300 or 400 other awards. That's not important. Tell them not to mention where I went to school. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want you to say that day that I tried to be right on the walk. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try to feed the hungry. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try in my life to call those who were naked. I want you to say on that day that I did try in my life to visit those who were in prison. I want you to say that I tried to love and serve humanity. Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness. And all of the other shallow things will not matter. I won't have any money to leave behind. I won't have the fine and luxurious things of life to leave behind. But I just want to leave a committed life behind. And that's all I want to say. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word for him, if I can show somebody he's traveling wrong, then my living will not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian, if I can bring salvation to a world once for all, if I can spread the message as the Master taught, then my living will not be in vain. Yes, Jesus, I want to be on your right or your left side. Not for any selfish reason. I want to be on your right or your left side, not in terms of some political kingdom or ambition, but I just want to be there in love and in justice and in truth and in commitment to others so that we can make of this old world a new world.
This morning I would like to use as a subject from which to preach the drum major instinct. The drum major instinct. And our text for the morning is taken from a very familiar passage in the 10th chapter as recorded by St. Mark. Beginning with the 35th verse of that chapter, we read these words. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came unto him, saying, Master, we would that thou shouldest do for us whatsoever we shall desire. And he said unto them, What would ye that I should do for you? And they said unto him, Grant unto us that we may sit, one on thy right hand and the other on thy left hand in thy glory. But Jesus said unto them, Ye know not what ye ask. Can ye drink of the cup that I drink of, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? And they said unto him, We can. And Jesus said unto them, Ye shall indeed drink of the cup that I drink of, and with the baptism that I am baptized withal shall ye be baptized. But to sit on my right hand and on my left hand is not mine to give, but it shall be given to them for whom it is prepared. And then Jesus goes on toward the end of that passage to say, But so shall it not be among you, but whosoever will be great among you shall be your servant, and whosoever of you will be the chiefest shall be servant of all. The setting is clear. James and John are making a specific request of the Master. They had dreamed, as most of the Hebrews dreamed, of a coming king of Israel who would set Jerusalem free. A time comes when silence is betrayal, even when pressed by the demands of inner truth. Men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all the apathy of conformist thought within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found that the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony. But we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision. But we must speak. I've chosen to preach about the war today because I agree with Dante that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in a period of moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. Now, of course, one of the difficulties in speaking out today grows out of the fact that there are those who are seeking to equate dissent with disloyalty. It's a dark day in our nation when high-level authorities will seek to use every method to silence dissent. And I say that those who are seeking to make it appear that anyone who opposes the war is a fool or a traitor or an enemy of our soldiers is a person who has taken a stand against the best in our tradition. There will be no meaningful solution until some attempt is made to know these people and hear their broken cries. And I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. We are called to speak for the weak,
for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those it calls enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers. We are met by deep but understandable mistrust. To speak for them is to explain this lack of confidence in Western words, and especially their distrust of American intentions now. Now that is little left to build on save bitterness. The world now demands a maturity of America that we may not be able to achieve. I am as deeply concerned about our own troops there as anything else. For it occurs to me that what we are submitting them to is not simply the brutalizing process that goes on in any war where armies face each other and seek to destroy. We are adding cynicism to the process of death, for they must know after the short period there that none of the things we claim to be fighting for are really involved. And the more sophisticated surely realize that we are on the side of the wealthy and the secure while we create a hell for the poor. Somehow this madness must cease. We must stop now. This way of settling difference is not just. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. I speak as a citizen of the world, for the world as it stands aghast at the path we have taken. I speak as one who loves America. To the leaders of our own nation, the great initiative in this war is ours. The initiative to stop it must be ours.
I don't think you realize down here in Birmingham what you mean to us up there in New York. And I don't think that white Americans understand what Birmingham means to all of us throughout this country. When we think about the little kids being tossed from one side of the street to the other by the tremendous force of this hose, and we think about, this picture just sickens me, this big brave policeman down here with his knee on the throat of this lady. And the problem of it is, ladies and gentlemen, is that this same picture of the dogs and of this policeman with his knee in the throat of this lady, it's a picture that's being portrayed throughout the world. And I think the conscience of America is beginning to awaken. I think the first steps that were made here by the Birmingham businessmen with Dr. King and the other leaders down here is an indication that perhaps the conscience of Birmingham is beginning to awaken. The only thing that we are demanding is that we be allowed to move ahead just like any other American citizen.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop.
I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
I know you're asking today, how long will it take? Somebody's asking, how long will prejudice blind the visions of men? I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment, yes, sir, however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, because truth crushed earth will rise again. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. Yes, sir. Because no lie can live forever. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. How long? Because you shall reap what you sow. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. How long? Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yes, that scaffold sways the future. Yes. Behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. How long? Not long. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Yes, how long? Not long. Not long. Because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Yes, He's trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. Yes, sir. He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. Yes, his truth is marching on. Yes, he has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching
on. Greenville, South Carolina. In this church, whose pastor is J.S. Hall, a group protests the treatment accorded Jackie Robinson at the local airport. Local NAACP President A.J. Wittenberg describes the incident.
The manager of this airport told them that this was not the waiting room for Negroes, that the one around at the back at the side. Mr. Robinson came and told them that he was an interstate passenger, that surrogation was unlawful. Then he summons the policeman and told the policeman, if these Negroes sit down, arrest them. Mr. Robinson said to this manager, that if I sit down, will you really arrest me and I'm an interstate passenger? He really said yes. He said, you a Negro, aren't you?
Jacob did the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jacob did the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. You may talk about the king of Gideon, you may talk about the men of Saul. There's none like good old Joshua.
Outside, singing.
Jacob did the battle of Jericho, 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 Joshua picked the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. You may talk about the king of Gideon, you may talk about the man of Saul. There's none like good old Joshua at the battle of Jericho. Up to the walls of Jericho, he marched with spear in hand. Go below them, Ramhorn, Joshua cried, for the battle hand in my hand. Joshua picked the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua picked the battle of Jericho, and the walls.
I have a dream. Those words may be the most famous words ever spoken. Dr. Martin Luther King roused a nation with those words in Washington, D.C. in 1963. He dreamed of all God's children, black and white, Jew and Gentile, Protestant and Catholic. The speech was the highlight of 10 years of protests and boycotts and legal challenges. The protests were peaceful. They met fire hoses with the quiet energy of peaceful resistance. They met ferocious dogs and sheriff's deputies with extraordinary calm. They were organized. They were thoughtful. They were guided by the light of reason and love for each other and their country. Can you imagine what it must have been like to organize all those protests? Who decided where to rally? Who got the permits? Who prepared bail for all the arrests? Who called the media? Who wrote the speeches? What was it like behind the scenes of a lunch counter sit-in or a rally at the park? Who made sure Grandma and Grandpa would be there, standing tall for equality? I'll tell you, it was Ella Josephine Baker. Ella Baker was the champion behind the scenes of the fight for equality.
The 1960s brought great change and great turmoil. They also presented the great turning point in American history, where people of color demanded and won equality with all Americans. The civil rights movement was massive. Boycotts and protests, sit-ins at restaurants, leaders in the courts, all led to the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education, ending segregation in schools. The Civil Rights Act, passed 10 years later, gave people of all races equal rights to work, live, and be free in their own country. The modern civil rights movement that broke the barriers of segregation featured many familiar faces: Thurgood Marshall, Rosa Parks, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But protest movements are often fought in the trenches, organizing protests and sit-ins, lectures and conferences that inspire and create the blueprint of a movement. Throughout all of it, Ella Josephine Baker, steadfast and headstrong, pushed organizations like the NAACP and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference into action.
It took someone with incredible vision, strength, and organizational skills to be able to put those things together. And Ella Baker, I think, was unique in the fact that she was able to do all of those things.
Ella Baker was one of the founders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which showed the American people just what kind of injustice was being dealt to American citizens of color.
Most of her experience on the job was organizing communities for protest, so that was her background.
Their peaceful resistance to harassment, arrest, and violence helped generate sympathy and move public opinion away from segregation and toward equality.
The underlying message that Martin Luther King was pushing, and that was that of nonviolence, and he learned it from Mahatma Gandhi, and that you turn the other cheek, that you don't exhibit violence for violence. And so we had that from the very beginning. If you're not going to be this way, then we don't want you as a part of this movement, because you've got to be strong enough to deal with this.
When you talk about this nonviolent posturing that we see being taken on by Dr. King and members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, understand that it was a real strategy. It was a strategy to put the onus on that other person. They then become the aggressor if you are the one who is sitting there and simply trying to exercise your right to eat a hamburger in a lunch counter.
Though she never gained the kind of fame that so many civil rights leaders of the time did, those leaders listened to Ella Josephine Baker. An eloquent writer and forceful speaker, Ella challenged her African-American brothers and sisters to face violence with nonviolence. They put aside their fears to confront what were known as Jim Crow laws, a set of legal standards that kept African Americans from having equal rights to vote, work, and live freely in society.
I think it had to instill a sense of a concern in any human being who had any ounce of love in their heart that this is not right. This is definitely wrong. Something has got to be done.
She was the guru of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and she had a philosophy which was very straightforward. She didn't believe in one person being the leader, and whenever they got in to a campaign, they would always turn to Ella Baker for advice and counsel. And I think that was her great contribution to the struggle of the 60s.
To her dying breath, Ella Baker fought for justice. She said late in her life, "In order for us as poor and oppressed people to become a part of a society that is meaningful, the system under which we now exist has to be radically changed."
Think of the worst things people can say about your culture, about your race, about your religion, about your people. Are they true? Could it be that you're not as smart, or you're money hungry, or you're a drunk, or you're cold and calculating? Of course not. You're an individual. Chances are your culture has made contributions in a masterful way to cultures throughout the world. But the more the bigots say it, the more it seems true. The more these stereotypes are hoisted upon the cultural landscape, the more people look at blacks and Jews, Muslims, Catholics, Native Americans, Asians, and Hispanics with wary eyes, wondering if the demonizing insults are true. How in the world can you believe in yourself if those around you believe you're a lesser life form? Dr. Carter G. Woodson had an answer for that. That answer is knowledge.
What, you may ask, is so important about studying history? The answer is as simple as it is important. If you knew your culture's history was directly linked to great writers, powerful leaders, successful business people, and pioneers, wouldn't that make you proud? Wouldn't that inspire you to do great things yourself? Those who endeavor to understand their own history are paving a path toward a bright future. Carter G. Woodson, the father of black history, knew that knowledge of the African American experience would be the last way to destroy the chains of slavery. And so he made it his life's passion. In early 20th century America, it was popularly accepted that blacks in Africa had contributed nothing to world civilization, that slavery actually benefited those Africans who had the good fortune to be caught up in the slave trades.
It was damaging African Americans because they too were being exposed to these ideas and accepted them as truth, and it had a damaging effect on their self-esteem and their belief in themselves to be able to go on and educate and contribute to the world.
Those kinds of distortions not only permeated the world of white Americans, but sunk deeply into the souls of African Americans. If one was to believe these lies about his own people, then how could he achieve the confidence to break the mold? In 19 books and dozens of published articles, Carter G. Woodson worked to erase that false history and began to help all Americans of all cultures to understand the true history of the African people's experience in America and across the world.
When you think of black people as inferior, it would only make sense, this argument that they had done nothing to contribute to the world. So he's going to point out all of those fallacies and really try to give the black community a rallying point around which to push their efforts, that we really needed to do something to make people aware, not just black people, but white people, about all of the contributions that people of African descent, both on the continent of Africa and also in this country, have made to the world and to the United States of America.
He believed that hard facts, through research and fair-mindedness, would bring balance to history, and that his thesis was that all peoples in the world had made a contribution to civilization. And once that people on a mass scale understood this, there would be greater respect for all races, all ethnic groups, all religions.
Before Carter Woodson began publishing his own writings and those of contemporary historians, there were few media outlets that would shed light on the full story of African and African American achievements in the United States. He made sure Americans heard a different side of the story. In 1926, Woodson founded Negro History Week, which later evolved into Black History Month. To this day, the occasion continues to remind all Americans of the great accomplishments of writers, entrepreneurs, civil rights leaders, artists, and educators who helped create modern America. Woodson also founded what is now called the Study of African American Life and History, founded in 1915. This is the agency that decides on the theme for Black History Month each year. This legacy is still helping to inspire new generations of young people with true stories of outstanding achievements by Americans of African descent.
No person can imagine where he's going unless he knows where he's been.
The more I learn as I've continued to educate myself and to study about people like James Lafayette, like Anthony Johnson, like Maggie Walker, it's an absolute inspiration to me, because not only did they look like me, but because here you have an individual with enough character, enough strength, enough skill, that living in some very difficult times, they were able to use what they had. No excuses, no pity parties, but use what they had to advance their cause and take not only themselves, but other people to another level.
Across our country today, African Americans have overcome terrible lies and stereotypes to achieve great success. Carter Woodson inspired each of these people to understand the success that has been achieved by pioneers of their culture and the contributions they have made and are now making to our nation.
These chains do not define me. No man, no woman is born a slave. We are forced into it. We are whipped into it. We are stolen from our families, but I refuse to accept slavery as my fate. I refuse to wear these chains. I am a man. I make my own way. My ancestor Anthony Johnson, the slave Antonio, destroyed his shackles too.
Before the great factories, before the automobiles and television, the foundation of the American economy was the harvest. Vast farms built America. Land was available in wide open areas. A man could put down roots, claiming hundreds of acres, and build generations of wealth, unless the man was enslaved. Slavery has been a part of the tapestry of America from the very start. Indentured servants, both white and black, came here to work for their freedom shortly after the first settlers landed in Jamestown in 1607. In 1621, an indentured servant called Antonio landed in Jamestown as one of those captives. He knew nothing of this land. He knew nothing of its customs. He was a man no longer free. Antonio was among the first wave of Africans who were transplanted to North America. The first wave of nearly 500,000 Africans sold into slavery for nearly 3 centuries. Yet within 20 years of his arrival in the New World, Antonio rose in class and determined his own destiny. Antonio, the indentured servant, became Anthony Johnson, one of early America's first landowners. How is this possible? Slavery was different in those first years of America. It was an economic issue more than one of race.
There are distinctions between a servant for a set period of time, usually 5 to 7 years, versus a slave, which would be a person who's a servant for life.
He served an Englishman named Richard Bennett on a tobacco plantation near James City. Impressed with Anthony's ability to comprehend the mechanics and business of farming, the Bennetts allowed him to farm independently, marrying the only African-American woman on the plantation and even baptize his children. And then Anthony won his freedom and purchased his own land, freeing himself of the shackles of slavery. Like so many Africans brought over to the New World, Anthony most likely was highly skilled when he arrived.
Anybody could be kidnapped. Anybody could be taken on board the slave ship. Might not just be farmers, probably weren't. Probably people who had great knowledge in medicine, great knowledge in metalwork, great knowledge in carpentry, woodwork. So you could say Africa lost a lot, probably, of its best people, its most skilled people.
Anthony's story is impressive enough, but with it comes an ironic twist. As he continued to purchase more and more acres of land, Anthony needed help to farm that land. Like landowners across the new America, he purchased his own indentured servants. Anthony Johnson, a former slave, was now a slave owner. In fact, records of the time show that Johnson actually went to court to beat back an effort by a slave named John Kaser to be freed after 7 years. Anthony won his case, and his slave remained with him for the next 17 years.
But Anthony Johnson, to lend all the more irony to this, claimed that John Kaser, by being an African, was his servant for life, which in effect is saying slavery without saying it.
But times and attitudes were beginning to harden. The kind of freedom a former slave of African descent would enjoy was becoming a rarity. Between 1622 and 1705, Virginia passed a series of laws that established nearly all Africans as slaves, removed all rights, all privileges, and all manner of equality. Most importantly, the legislature mandated that every African-American child born into the system of slavery would remain in slavery for life. Once again, economics played a big part in the process.
Some very shrewd and crafty owners said, well, if we can make a distinction or to somehow separate one person, not because of their religion or not because anyone can become a particular religion, but the thing that you cannot change is the color of your skin. So if you can say that this one person should always be a slave because he is not white, always within that society, it's going to be easy to capture those runaways or those individuals and to keep them in a situation which could make it hard for such an individual to ever obtain freedom.
I think there was a lot of fear of a strong, free African population emerging. I think partially it had to do with fear of the other, fear of whoever was different, fear of maybe another group rising, probably to challenge the control of the white aristocracy.
The consequence of that is that the idea of people being inferior or people not having the same rights toward democracy or freedom or the opportunity of movement or any of these things, we still feel today.
It took 182 years and a bloody civil war before slavery was abolished in America with the Emancipation Proclamation declared by Abraham Lincoln. That made Anthony Johnson the rarest of American pioneers.
By now, you know the names by heart. Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Adams, Lafayette, the stars of the American Revolution, the men who figured it all out, how to create a new government, how to beat down the world's greatest power, how to demand freedom and then get it. But I'll bet there's a name you don't know. Important, heroic, vital to the cause of freedom. His name was James. Over time, he was James Armistead Lafayette. James sure did fool them redcoats. He had them thinking that he was a waiter. They just talked up all their grand plans about how they were going to send old George Washington to his grave. James pocketed that information, then delivered it directly to the Marquis de Lafayette, the French hero of the Revolutionary War. That's why James is an American treasure. That's why it's only fitting he changed his name after he won his own freedom. James Armistead Lafayette.
If you take a hard look at the middle of the Revolutionary War, it's almost impossible to believe the Americans actually won. For most of the war, the colonials were outmanned by the British Army, which at the time was the world's greatest power. They were often outmaneuvered and outsmarted. They lost battle after battle. The United States of America was nearly destroyed before it was ever created. To win this war, the Americans needed perseverance, a sense of cunning, and a powerful desire for freedom. They also needed help to discover the battle plans of the British Army. The best way was to find a way to spy on the British and gather that information. The Americans had such a man. He was known at that time as James, a man in slavery. During the Revolutionary War, many enslaved Africans worked for the British with promises of freedom at war's end. But James asked his owner for permission to work instead for French General Marquis de Lafayette, who came to America to help the young country defeat the British.
Naturally, when you think about what's happening in the English colonies, the American colonies at that point in time, one naturally would think, since the Americans were not offering the promise of freedom, that everyone would take off and willingly support the British. So to find someone like James who was not working for them would be quite surprising and would have probably never occurred to the British generals that he ends up spying.
The British General Cornwallis had marched his soldiers from the Carolinas to Virginia. They had taken over Portsmouth and set fire to Richmond. Cornwallis put hundreds of slaves into play, using them in support roles, digging, hauling, cooking, and serving food to British soldiers. When Lafayette set up headquarters in New Kent, Virginia, he decided to do the same thing.
The American forces, led by General Lafayette in Virginia, were stumped because they could not get good information about what was going on behind the British lines. Here you have an enslaved person who's coming in contact with them in New Kent County and asked his master to go and serve with this man.
The first success came in a battle against former patriot and now traitor Benedict Arnold. With the information relayed by their valuable new spy, the Americans ambushed Arnold's British camp and came close to capturing Arnold himself. In July of 1781, James then found a way to infiltrate the military camp of General Cornwallis. Passing himself off as a waiter, he gathered significant information that included the number of ships and boats in and around the Hampton Roads area, including Yorktown. Using James's information, American and French forces positioned the French Navy on the Chesapeake Bay, bottling up the York River. Washington and his troops then marched south to Williamsburg to join Lafayette, where they routed the British by land and sea. The brilliant and heroic efforts of James Lafayette won him little reward at first. Even though he helped to win freedom for the people of America, those very same people refused to give James his own freedom even after 5 years of trying.
If he had fought for the British, he would have won his freedom. But because he sided with the Americans and because of the role that he played as a spy, he's not going to automatically be awarded his freedom. It's going to take a petition some years down the road, a special petition, especially for him, to the Virginia legislature in order for him to apply for and eventually win his freedom.
The Marquis de Lafayette, considered a great hero of the war, personally recommended James be considered a free man in America. In 1784, the great French general wrote to the Virginia General Assembly, "His intelligence from the enemy's camp were industriously collected and more faithfully delivered. He perfectly acquitted himself with some important commissions I gave him and appears to me entitled to every reward his situation can admit of." On January 9th, 1786, James finally gained his freedom. One of his first acts was to add to his name that of the general who inspired him and pleaded for his freedom. James the Slave became James Lafayette, an American hero of the Revolutionary War.
How do we obtain power? Is it a good side of beef and taking an axe to a cord of wood? Does power come from pushing people around? Does it come from the gun, the whip, the fist? I'll tell you where I get my power. I get it from knowledge. The more I know, the more people notice me. The more I know, the more people value me. So I drink in knowledge. I know history. I know how to keep the books of a business. I know how to read legal documents and formulas of science. I know what it feels like to be enveloped in a book that takes me hundreds of miles and decades away. At the beginning of the 20th century, the African American had little access to this power, until Booker T. Washington demanded it for himself, for all American people of color. And people surely did notice.
October 16th, 1901. The President of the United States entertains a guest for lunch. Theodore Roosevelt's guest is a man of African descent. To many Americans, this revelation is shocking. It shouldn't have been, for this president and the man who served before him saw Booker T. Washington as a charismatic leader, an exceptional public speaker and powerful advocate for education. There may be no adequate words for the success achieved by Booker T. Washington, Before he founded the prestigious Tuskegee Institute, now in its 3rd century of educating young men and women, Booker Taliaferro Washington was among the last generation of American slavery. He grew up in the harshest of conditions, but even as a child of slavery with no education, the young Booker saw and heard a vision that struck his soul. Carrying his mistress's books to the schoolhouse, this young man heard a teacher giving lessons. He saw students absorbing something he had no access: information. He wanted it. He wanted it worse than clothing, worse than a good meal. To Booker T. Washington, school was the equivalent of paradise. The desire to find that paradise informed his every action from that point forward. Then came the Civil War and emancipation for millions of African Americans. Booker was only 9 when he and his family were freed, but he knew then what he wanted with his newfound freedom. By train, stagecoach, and foot, Booker T. Washington made his way to Hampton Institute, where he worked as a janitor to pay tuition. His education, however, was not the end of the journey. On July 4th, 1881, with only $2,000 for salaries, no land, and no buildings, Booker T. Washington opened the Tuskegee Institute in Macon County, Alabama, the heart of the Deep South. By 1915, Tuskegee had 200 faculty members and 2,000 students. His success with Tuskegee gave Booker T. Washington tremendous influence throughout the country. He was able to raise money, much of it from wealthy white businessmen, to fund 65 small black schools throughout the South. In 1898, President William McKinley visited Tuskegee and praised Washington's work. Theodore Roosevelt, president from 1901 to 1909, regularly sought Washington's opinion on racial matters and consulted him for recommendations before appointing African Americans to federal positions. Yet, not all African Americans liked Booker's methods. He believed the path to freedom was a useful education, not necessarily a demand for equal rights.
Even though you have the race factor, America is a capitalistic society, and green will get you much further than anything else might quite possibly be able to do. Booker T. Washington understood that, and I think when you look at what we're facing today in some of our communities, he might actually be laughing at the path that we took, because ultimately we're proving his ideas about the importance of wealth accumulation, of business ownership, that proved to be correct.
Booker T. Washington was ridiculed by many civil rights leaders of his time for this position. Yet his legacy, in the form of Tuskegee Institute, is still helping young African Americans develop their independence by developing Booker's version of paradise: education.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.